Well, g'day guys. It's a beautiful midsummer day out here. The cicadas are humming in the trees. You can probably hear them. What better time to be out on the water dry fly fishing? I love dry fly fishing. And this secret that I'm going to share with you today has transformed my dry fly fishing. I've been fly fishing for more than 25 years now, and it's taken me a long time to really learn and understand this. I hope you get as much out of it as I have. Now, to really understand this secret, first you're going to need to understand what the biggest problem is in dry fly fishing, in my view. Now, there are lots of things that can lead to failure in dry fly fishing. There are lots of mistakes, things like poor wading, disturbing the water, wearing bright colours, fast movement, putting your fly line over fish. All of those kinds of things can be problems, absolutely. But in my view, the biggest problem by far is drag. Now, this is something that you've probably heard about, but I really want to go into a bit of depth here to understand what exactly drag is, what causes it, and what we can do to try and avoid it.
Drag is what happens when our tippet straightens out and gets tight to the fly. If our line or leader is laying across different currents, then the surface tension on our line pulls any slack out of the tippet and starts to drag the fly across the surface. Sometimes it's obvious, other times it can be more difficult to see.
Now that's a big red flag to trout. If a trout sees a dragging fly, in most cases, they're not going to eat it.
Okay, so we know drag is bad, but how do we avoid it? That's where the real secrets to dry fly fishing come into it. Keep watching and I'll give you a system of strategies that will have you making great drag-free drifts and catching way more fish. If avoiding drag is the goal, then we can develop a system that is designed to do that. There are several things we can do, but really, it's the combination of all these factors where the magic happens. Let's start with our rig, the rod, line, leader, and fly. Because optimising these things is important to allow us to effectively use some of the techniques I'm going to show you. Starting at the pointy end, and I'm fishing a fairly large fly today so that it's visible on video, but for most of my dry fly fishing, I'll tie on a smaller, more streamlined fly. The more air resistance we have in our fly, the more difficult it will be to implement these strategies. So I don't, for example, fish large foam flies for trout very often. I usually prefer the more typical caddis and mayfly patterns, particularly those tied with CDC. Now moving up to the leader, and this is the most critical part of the whole system.
One of the very first things that we're usually taught in fly casting is how to straighten out our line and straighten out our leader. And in a lot of fishing situations, that might be exactly what you want to do. But in dry fly fishing, it's a mistake, in my opinion. Once you have straightened out your leader and your tippet, it's extremely difficult to then incorporate any slack into the tippet. I'd say it's almost impossible, actually. So what you want to do is lengthen your leader and lighten your leader so that it doesn't have as much energy to travel through to that dry fly, so that you're able to deliberately incorporate some slack into your cast. Trying to incorporate slack after you've made the cast is a losing game, in my opinion. The slack has to be in there from the beginning. Now I'm going to be fishing a leader today that's 18 feet long, tapered down to 7x tippet. Now that might sound a bit extreme, but that length of leader and tippet is going to allow me to present slack effectively to the fly. It's not as scary as it sounds, but you might find that a different length of leader works for you. I would say start by building up and lengthening your leader and lightening your leader from what you normally fish until you can extend out to the range that you find is most effective for you.
The reel is the least important thing. It's just a line holding device. A light, smooth drag is a nice thing to have for protecting light tippets on bigger fish, but beyond that, just choose what works for you. The fly line is more important. I like a 3-weight line with a long front taper, a presentation style line. A heavy fly line can transfer too much energy to the leader, and a line that's too light can make dealing with wind, larger flies, or dry dropper rigs difficult. So I find a 3-weight to be a good compromise. For the rod, I like a longer rod, 9 foot to 9 foot 6 in length, and in a 3 or 4 weight. A long rod allows a more vertical angle to the cast when we want to cast leader downwards towards the water, and it's also useful for high sticking, which we'll go into later. Now let's take a look at the casting, which is also super important. In order to have any accuracy with this long leader system, we need to cast tight loops and angle them slightly down towards the water surface. You can't be accurate trying to cast horizontally above the water and then just dropping the fly down onto the surface. So angle your casting plane down a little. By then tilting the rod off to either side, we can have some control about where we place the slack in relation to the fly.
Now, another important skill here is to be able to fish off either side of your body. You'll notice that I'm standing on river left here, looking upstream. So the river's on my right, and I'm casting off my right-hand shoulder. That's going to give me the right shaped curve and the right shaped slack in order to present the fly well. But if I was fishing off the other bank, I'd be casting across my body off my left shoulder like this. Now, it's really no different for me casting either way. It's just as accurate either side, either that way or that way, because you notice I've got my hand out in front of me here. My elbow's by my side. I'm using a very compact casting stroke with my finger on top of the rod. And I'm not waving my whole arm around, using my shoulder or lifting my elbow or any of that. That's going to give me big, wide open, uncontrolled loops. I've got my elbow pretty much by my side, and it's just a very controlled, small, tight casting arc. It's not a wide casting arc between there and there. It's between there and there. Nice tight loops, and that's what's going to give you accuracy. You see, if you try to make an accurate slackline presentation with a big wide casting arc where you're dropping your rod too far behind you or dropping your rod on the delivery cast, you're going to find it almost impossible to be accurate. If you keep it nice and tight with a tight casting arc there and a really controlled stroke, you'll be able to deliver slack with accuracy off either side of your body. And that's what you want to be able to do. And even if I'm reaching out a little bit further on a longer cast, which I don't do that often for dry fly fishing, it's still just a very controlled casting stroke like that. I'm not waving around like this, arms flying everywhere. Nice and tight and controlled, tight loops, and that's what's going to give you your accuracy. So another thing that I think is pretty poorly understood in dry fly fishing is mending. I think mending usually causes more problems than it fixes. When you think about it, most of the time, if you incorporate slack into your tippet and then you mend the fly line, all that you're doing is you're pulling that slack out of the tippet by moving the fly line. You're actually making the problem worse, not better. So there are a few niche cases where I might want to mend in dry fly fishing, but they're pretty uncommon. Usually it would be if I want to pile some slack and a fly into a pocket behind a rock and there's fast current coming by. If I'm able to effectively mend my fly line upstream into that fast water beside that pocket, I can lengthen perhaps the length of drag-free drift that I get in that pocket slightly, but it's fairly minimal. So here are 5 solutions for you in order to minimise drag in your drift. The first one is to start with a long, fine leader that's designed to dissipate energy and is designed to incorporate slack into the tippet section close to the fly. The second solution is to position yourself for less drag so that you're not casting across complex currents or different speeds of currents. That's simply a matter of assessing how fast the currents are and what your best casting position is. The third solution is to learn to incorporate the right amount of slack into your cast. There's no point trying to get slack into your drift after you've made the cast. It's not going to work. You have to put the slack in at the beginning. The fourth solution is to fish shorter drifts, particularly if you're fishing faster water. The temptation is to try to make a cast and fish the longest drift that you can from the top of the run all the way to the bottom. In reality, you're never going to be able to get drag-free drift for that long. So you're better off actually fishing shorter drifts, and the second that that fly starts to drag, pick it up and recast it. Actually, the fly landing on the water can be a trigger for the fish to feed. Have you ever noticed how many times a fish comes up and eats a dry in a millisecond after it hits the water? That fly landing on the water is actually a trigger a lot of the time for the fish to feed. So instead of trying to fish the whole drift from the top to the bottom and mending, just the second that the fly starts to drag, pick it up again and recast it. Now the fifth solution is for those really difficult little pockets that are in amongst fast water. There's really not many effective ways to fish those apart from just physically getting much closer to them and literally holding your line up off the water. If you have a properly constructed leader that has enough taper in it, you can cast that leader with just the tiniest amount of fly line or even only the leader out of the tip of the rod. And what you want to do then is put the fly into that pocket and hold all of your line up off the water and suspend your leader above the water as much as possible so that it doesn't get carried away in that fast water. Now, if you're able to incorporate all of this information and these techniques that I've talked about today, I hope that it'll transform your dry fly fishing the way it has mine. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.